Hey, welcome back to Behind the Label. Today we're continuing with our first inaugural series that we did on the Samuels family, and today we're doing the tie-in with how the Samuels family propagates into the Maker's Mark brand, which I'm sure everyone's familiar with. So last time we were talking, give us a kind of a recap on what we talked about.
So we kind of finished up. We went through actually the first 5 generations of the Samuels family, and we were on number 6, which was Bill Samuel Sr. We kind of talked about how his partner sold the T.W. Samuels distillery, and he didn't have the money or the funds to purchase it. So he was out, no distillery, and he actually even lost the names in a court battle we talked about. So he was on his own, and he had some money, but not enough to purchase another distillery by himself. So he started raising some funds. So at this time we're talking about the 1940s, and he pretty much started raising some funds, and he started working on a recipe. Remember what we said about what he thought about the T.W. Samuels recipe?
Yeah, he wasn't a big fan of his own family's recipe. He didn't think it was very smooth and just wasn't very pleasant. So he decided to change the recipe, and it's actually kind of one of the tie-ins with, we'll get to in just a minute, with the kind of one of my favorite facts with it. Only thing I was going to add to that was, at the time he basically didn't have money for his own distillery, he was still kind of using the family name, correct? No, that's right, that's later on, when he starts his own distillery. But
he kind of lost that in a court battle where he tried to use the old Samuels name, and he lost control of that, so he couldn't even use his own family's name. So he's out, and he's doing different things. He's trying to raise some money. And what would you normally do if you're trying to raise money and figure out a new recipe for your new distillery? What would you do?
Well, before I read the story, I would probably try to make small batches of whiskey and maybe rapid age them in, say, like a small keg. That's kind of what came to my mind when I was thinking, oh, he's working on this new recipe. How are we going to do that? But he came up with a very inventive way around it.
He sure did. You got to think, at that time, almost all bourbon was aged in 53-gallon, barrels. So you're talking about at least 4 years before you figure out if that recipe that you decided on is worth anything. So he went about by doing it by making bread. He spent years having his family try it and deciding on what recipe he wanted to use. He knew he wanted to go away from rye. So right here, this is rye bread. So if you taste that.
So let's give that a try.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you can definitely taste that the rye. It's got a little bit of a pepper. Same way you can do if you're familiar with whiskey. The rye whiskeys and wheat whiskeys are basically the two types of bourbon. The rye whiskeys are definitely more of a pepper burn type flavor. The wheat whiskeys are a little smoother. So I can see where that would make sense. And excuse me.
Here, just take a drink.
Yeah, I think I will.
Sit down.
By the way, which one are we starting with?
We're actually starting with Maker's Mark. We'll talk about it here in a minute and kind of give you. We're not, like I said, we're not here to tell you if it's good or great or bad. We're kind of here to tie in this label. So
tell the history. But I know from even the two of us, we made a batch of homebrew beer, and it's basically like making bread soup.
Yes.
It really is. So you basically are just having the same grains and the same process you would make if you were making homemade bread, just that basically you're adding a lot more water. And so that's why this trick he did kind of was pretty successful and actually very smart.
So he knew he wanted to go with a sweeter type whiskey. So he went and tried a lot of recipes with wheat, which is our other bread here. We're going to try that.
Yeah. So the difference is obvious. I'm sure if you've had white bread and rye bread.
The wheat is just, the wheat is a lot sweeter. There's not the peppery flavor to it. So he had to work on this recipe. And what he did, he put the recipe that they liked the best in this bourbon.
So is this originally then an actual bread recipe? Is that a known thing that this was originally bread?
The same amount of the grains that went into the bread, he decided to put into the bourbon. But he still doesn't have a distillery though. He's just making bread right now. So we jump ahead pretty much about 10 years, 1953, he finds this old distillery. It actually pretty old, it had been around since 1805, called the Burke Springs Distillery in Loretto. So it'd been out, it actually was shut down like 2 years before, in 1951. And he was able to get the funds to purchase this old distillery.
Now, what did he do? You said it was about a 10-year gap there.
Mm-hmm.
What was he doing
Well,
between those times? Was he a farmer? Was he, a salesman? What is it? What
he's pretty much just working to. He's raising money in order to buy the distillery.
Did he have investors, or this was just a solo project?
This is pretty much him. There were no other partners with him when he bought this. This was him and his wife, who we'll talk about. So.
All right, so 10 years goes by, he buys essentially a dilapidated distillery that's been out of business for 2 years. What was the brand that the Loretto location made before that?
It was Burke Springs. I have to look it up to see exactly which all brands they did make. Like I said, it had been in the family since 1805, and they actually sold out right around Prohibition. And then it had been ran on since then by another owners. And they pretty much ran it until 1951 and just were done and sold out. So he buys it. He uses his recipe. So you're talking about he starts producing this in 1954, 4 years before he releases it. So you think about it, that's a lot of investment. You got to buy the distillery once he figures out his recipe, buy the distillery, make it, and then wait 4 years before you figure out whether you're going to make it or not.
I'm just wondering if he made any, kind of like I was alluding to before, any small batches. Like, once he perfected his bread recipe, say 10 years ago, or was working on it, he said, oh, wow, that's a really good one. I wonder if he made like a small batch, because you're right, that would be scary for me to put all my eggs in that one basket and bet on a bread recipe.
Well, he could have probably put some different mash bills out there, but this is the one that he chose after that 4 years. And it's actually what it is, the mash bill, which is the recipe for this, is 70% corn, 16% wheat, so he went away from the rye, and 14% malted barley. And that's pretty much in all the mash bills of any Maker Mark's products. So he decided on that. So this is, Bill Samuels, he came up with the recipe, bought the distillery, but who did everything else?
I'm thinking there's a great woman behind a decent man.
There is, his wife Margie. So you take this bottle. This bottle is not like anything else you see. I mean, it's completely different than any other bottle that you see out there.
It's distinctive. It's the
very
silhouette is distinctive.
Yes. I mean, she come up with the shape of the bottle. She actually come up with the red wax. She come up with the name, and we talked about her and just the things that she loved. And one of the things she loved to do was collect pewter, and what's usually found on pewter.
Yeah, it's the mark, or the maker's stamp, basically. It's the maker's mark, basically. The
maker's mark.
Whoever, it's kind of like in jewelry, oftentimes in high-end jewelry, they will stamp that with whoever the jeweler is. In pewter, they used to do the same thing, where that, like a Paul Revere would stamp the stamp on the silverware. So it's the actual mark. That's why I guess the name came from it.
So she come up with the name, the shape of the bottle, the red wax, the logo, which, if you look at it, it says S4, and you're thinking, why S4? Well, if you watched the previous episode, we traced it back to the first part of the family that was actually distilling and farm distillery. Had a farm distillery.
Yeah, the
two generations.
Original Samuels.
Yeah, Bill Samuels Sr. was actually the fourth generation of commercial distillers started by T.W. Samuels. So that's where the S4 comes from. The S from the Star Farms, and the 4 from the generation. So we had that. If you notice, whiskey is spelled different.
Yeah.
So
what's the general rule? If it's made in a country that has an E,
it usually has an E. Yes. If it's not,
typically use it. So if you see like Irish whiskey, will have an E.
E. Yeah.
Scottish whiskey, no
does
E.
not. Does not. So she did all the marketing for this. The label, the way the label's done, everything. So I would say she is very instrumental in. I mean, one of the most instrumental women in bourbon. So
now, besides the design, was she, in person at the plant? Was she up there on the floor kind of making decisions? Or this was more like, hey, I got this great idea for a label, and he's like, oh, I like that.
Yeah, a marketing person, you figure they probably got their office.
So she was more on that end of it.
Yeah, but I mean, she made it what it is. I mean, if it was in a bottle like this, would it stand out?
No.
No. So she come up with this. So you've got to give her.
So cheers to Margie.
Cheers to Margie. Yes.
We'll clink on that one.
Yes.
It's good.
So, like I said, they come up with this in 1954.
And it hasn't changed since then. This has been the same since '54.
They made this one product until 2010.
So I mean, but the mash bill, the recipe, hasn't changed at all.
Hasn't changed at all.
Okay.
So, like I said, it's 7% corn, 16% wheat, 14% marbling barley.
And what's the age? What's the minimum age on
this one? They say they don't state it. It's usually between 5 and 8 years. So it's 5 to 8 years. It's actually a 90 proof. So it's kind of a lower proof. I guess middle of the range proof.
And this would be. It's not considered a blended whiskey, but it's made from more than one barrel. When they make the kind of their base run model, they basically mix different barrels together. It's not like you see like the barrel selects or the even small batch. It's not even like that. So this could be from who knows how many, 10 to 200 different barrels.
It could be thousands. I mean, it could be, because they're taking this, you got to think they're only making this product. So it's not like other distilleries where they have products that they age at the top, as they say, they're economic barrels, and then their middle, which is their good price, medium, great bourbon, and then the lower ones, which is your very, extremely high priced bourbons.
I didn't know that. That's something new to me. Now, why is I assume it has to do something with evaporation and temperature?
Yes, it does. The temperature. I mean, it's going to age quicker up top. So if you go to Buffalo Trace, if you buy their Ancient Age, something like that, Old Charter, that's only 3 to 4 years, because it ages so much faster the higher you get with all the heat.
Yeah.
So
that's kind of ironic that if you go buy this in a store, or especially you go to a bar or a restaurant, and you say, give me some top shelf, that's the good stuff.
Yes.
Whereas if you go in a store and you buy it off the bottom shelf, that's the bad stuff.
Yeah, this was bought in the middle of the shelf. This was bought right on the bottom.
Right on the bottom. There was actually a low spot in the floor.
Yes. But it wasn't too bad though, actually.
That's actually pretty good.
Bottle and bond, so it's at least 4 years, 100 proof. So it wasn't actually that bad. So, but this, like I said, they continue making this. Bill Samuels Sr. and his son, Bill Samuels Jr. actually started as a plant manager the same year they opened up the distillery. So he was with him at the start.
Back in the 50s.
Back in the 50s, yes.
Okay.
So they're producing this product up until 2010.
Now, when they first started, I know bourbon has kind of went through several kind of ups and downs, declines, and then it gets really hot. During the time this was started, where was bourbon setting? Was it kind of
the cheap 50s, 60s was they're doing well.
Okay.
50s, 60s, are I mean, then you start getting in the
70s,
the 80s.
Fame.
Kids are rebellious and they don't want to drink their dad's liquor, so that's when you see a switch over to vodkas and stuff with no flavor.
All the gins and vodkas.
Yes.
A lot of vodkas.
Yeah, so there was a rough patch during that period, but this held on during that time till 2010, and then in 2010, Bill Samuels Jr. come up with this. Maker's 46. It's actually what it is you take this same mash bill, they take a barrel that's just been emptied, and they take 46 seared French oak staves and they put in the barrel, and then they take a fresh barrel of this, put in that barrel with those staves, and they age it about 2 to 3 more months.
So, and that's not considered, because I know there's a rule in bourbon, you can't add any coloring, any flavoring. That's not considered coloring or flavoring.
No, it's not. I mean, you get to some points where some are putting them in different barrels and stuff, and so you'll see that, bourbon whiskey aged in a
I've seen that or like in a wine cask or something like that. But I guess if you're doing but still French oak, correct?
Well, yes, French oak staves. Now most of the barrels are American oak.
Right,
but it just has to be a new charred oak barrel to be considered, what it should be. So they mean, like Buffalo Trace is doing all these experiments now with different types of oak from all over the world.
Yep, I know at one of our bourbon sessions, I forget who was telling me, I've been Freddie, that was talking about that they're even experimenting with different kinds of wood, like native hardwoods, poplars and hickories, all kinds of stuff, even fruit woods. I think he said that they had like apple barrels and stuff that they were just kind of playing around with, that of course couldn't be called bourbon if you put it in that barrel originally, but if you finish it in that barrel, I guess that would, although I don't know, I'm not sure where that would fall. If that turns it away from bourbon, that it does not become bourbon at that point.
As long as it's a new oak barrel you're putting it into, you can put it into a secondary one. As long as it's new.
Okay, so as long as it's. Okay.
Yeah, so you sure can. So I think it's probably a good point to maybe end this first part.
Yeah, we'll stop at this segment.
And then we'll be trying this when we come back.
Sounds good.